welcome to the deep dive. So forget the latest streaming sensation for a minute. Today we're exploring something much closer to home. It's that often kind of hilarious, sometimes really frustrating cast of characters rattling around inside our own heads.
Right.
Think of it as, we're calling it Simpsons Syndrome.
Right.
Not literally Homer and Marge in there, but, a fun way to picture that inner emotional whirlwind we all experience.
Exactly. And yeah, just to be clear, we're not actually diagnosing anyone based on cartoons.
No, definitely not.
It's more about using them as like relatable stand-ins for those familiar, often kind of exaggerated emotional patterns that can really feel like they're running the show sometimes. And the goal isn't to get rid of these inner parts, but more to understand them, learn how to work with them.
And honestly, who hasn't felt that? That inner tug of war.
Yeah.
I mean, whether you're wrestling with burnout or battling anxiety, maybe trying to keep everyone happy.
People pleasing, yeah.
Or just dealing with that nagging inner critic. These internal battles, they're pretty universal, right?
Absolutely.
So our mission today really is to offer some accessible ways in, some starting points to navigate this inner landscape a bit better.
And we'll be leaning on ideas from things like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, and also mindfulness.
Okay.
What's really helpful, I think, is how these approaches often use language that feels very human. It's relatable. Sometimes there's even a bit of humor in how they help us understand these, quite serious parts of ourselves.
Right. Makes it less daunting. So think of this as your personal backstage pass, maybe, to your inner Springfield.
Light chuckle. Yeah, I like that.
We want to help you maybe spot your own internal resonance, figure out what makes these sometimes quirky characters tick, and just get some first insights into maybe becoming a more effective, I guess, director of your own internal story.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so let's unpack this inner Springfield idea a bit more. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it's really just a way to sort of personify the different emotional patterns we all have. These inner characters, they're symbolic, right? They stand for those patterns.
Okay.
They feel familiar, maybe a bit larger than life sometimes, and they definitely have their own signature ways of reacting to things.
Yeah.
And just recognizing that these parts have their own quirks, their own underlying needs, that can give you a much richer understanding of your inner world. It's not just a confusing mess.
Right. It's like acknowledging that the bit of you that wants the donut right now and the bit that's worrying about, I don't know, the deadline next week, they're both valid parts of you, even if they seem totally at odds.
Precisely. And the aim isn't to squash one or the other. It's to recognize them, understand what's driving them. Often, when we feel really overwhelmed, it's because the loudest voices, the most demanding of these inner characters, have kind of grabbed the microphone and are controlling the narrative. That's where that inner chaos feeling comes from.
Okay, that makes sense. So who are some of these common players then? Who might we find hanging out in our own inner Springfields?
Oh, there are definitely some recurring ones. A big one is what we could call the over-responsible. Maybe your inner Marge Simpson, right?
Okay, I can picture that.
This part tends to just shoulder an enormous amount of responsibility. Often it's driven by this deep fear that if they don't handle everything, things will just fall apart, completely unravel.
You might hear that voice saying,
yeah, if I don't do it, it won't get done. And then chaos. It's often got that quiet martyr vibe, too.
Oh, okay.
Just relentlessly taking care of everyone and everything else, often forgetting about their own needs, pushing aside rest, self-care, all in the name of maintaining control.
I think many people will recognize that one. What about the flip side? The one that just wants instant gratification. My inner Homer, maybe.
Exactly, the impulsive gratifier. It's all about chasing that immediate pleasure, usually as a way to escape some kind of discomfort right now.
The internal monologue is...
probably just, dopamine.
Yeah.
Right.
Chuckles.
And this shows up in lots of ways. Reaching for food, getting lost scrolling on your phone for hours, impulse buys online, even just hitting snooze or taking a nap when there's stuff to do.
And future consequences.
Often just a shrug, meh, future me can deal with it.
This part wants relief now.
Yeah.
And doesn't worry too much about the long-term impact.
Okay. And what about that thing some of us do? Using humor, maybe self-deprecating humor to deflect, avoid the tough stuff.
Yes, that could be the self-deprecating avoider.
Yeah.
Your inner Krusty the Clown, perhaps.
Maybe.
Here, laughter is almost like a shield, isn't it? It's a way to dodge confronting underlying pain or feeling vulnerable.
So the voice might say something like, with a nervous laugh. Heh, I'm a mess. I'm all right. On the surface, it looks lighthearted, but underneath, it can be about keeping uncomfortable feelings at arm's length. It's avoidance, just dressed up in jokes.
Interesting. And the one that's always focused on rules and shoulds and hitting certain standards?
That sounds very much like the enforcer. Maybe an inner Principal Skinner.
Okay, I see it.
Yeah, this part runs on a really strict set of internal rules, shoulds, ought tos, and a relentless drive to maintain standards, uphold a certain image.
So the inner talk is...
Probably something like, you have duties, standards, a reputation to uphold. It's not always about yelling internally. It's often more subtle, like applying pressure, maybe a bit of guilt tripping, to make sure everything gets done correctly according to its rigid rules. You often see this driving force behind people who identify as like overachievers or people pleasers, or those who tend to kind of clamp down on their emotions.
Wow, it's actually kind of unsettling how recognizable these cartoonish roles can feel. It really shows how these patterns, even if we exaggerate them with a metaphor, play such a real part in how we move through the world.
Absolutely. And look, if you're hearing these descriptions and thinking, oh no, that's me, it's really important to understand you're not like doomed to be a walking sitcom disaster.
David chuckles.
These inner characters, they actually developed for a reason. They were survival strategies, really, shaped by your specific experiences, your history, your deeply held beliefs, which we call schemas.
So they weren't, like, trying to mess things up. They weren't formed with bad intentions.
Not at all. Fundamentally, they are trying to help you in their own way. It's just that their methods might be, well, outdated or maybe not very effective or even kind of counterproductive in your life now.
Right.
Think of them as having good intentions, maybe, but using tools or approaches that aren't always the most skillful or helpful anymore.
And burnout or anxiety.
Right.
That can happen.
Well, often that happens when these different characters all start shouting at once, each one trying to push its own strategy for coping or handling a situation. It becomes overwhelming.
Okay, so the goal isn't to somehow, I don't know, banish these parts of ourselves, erase them.
No, definitely not. The goal is more about getting to know them better. It's about learning to listen, like, what is this part actually trying to tell me? What's it afraid of? Understanding where they came from, what experiences or beliefs created them, and then, crucially, consciously deciding which part needs the microphone or who should be in the driver's seat in any given situation.
You mentioned schemas again there. Could we dig into those a bit more? What exactly are schemas?
Yeah, definitely. Schemas are like the deeper blueprints, the often unconscious mental frameworks that our inner characters are kind of operating from.
Okay, blueprint.
They're these fundamental ways we've learned to make sense of ourselves, other people, and the world in general. And these schemas, they really shape how we interpret things, how we feel about them, and how we tend to react or behave.
And there are common types.
Oh, yes. Things like an abandonment schema, this deep belief that people you care about will inevitably leave you, or mistrust abuse, the expectation that others will probably hurt or take advantage of you, or maybe unlovability, that core feeling that you're somehow flawed and just not worthy of love. There are quite a few common ones.
Wow. So these are the really deep down stories we tell ourselves, often without even knowing we're doing it.
Exactly. Core stories about who we are, how we expect people to treat us, what we think life is generally going to be like.
And where do they come from?
Well, they often have their roots way back in our early experiences, childhood, the emotional atmosphere we grew up in. Our brains, especially when we're young, are like sponges just absorbing lessons from our environment.
Right.
And they distill these lessons into these recurring patterns, these internal rules that guide us later on. It's almost like an early operating system for our emotions and relationships, running quietly in the background. But maybe, an operating system based on outdated information from the past.
So just starting to see these underlying schemas, recognizing them, that's a really important step.
Absolutely crucial. Because the moment you start to identify these patterns not as absolute truths, but as these deeply ingrained, possibly outdated stories, you start to loosen their grip, their power over your present day thoughts, feelings, behaviors, lessons. You can begin to realize, okay, I don't have to keep living by these old lines someone else basically wrote for me. You can start to consciously write your own narrative.
Okay, so why is getting this handle on our inner Springfield, understanding these characters and schemas, why is it so important? What does it actually do for us?
Well, a huge thing is that when you can name these different parts of yourself, the inner critic, the people pleaser, the avoider, You create this really vital space between you, the part of you that's aware, the observer, and your automatic patterns. You start to see, oh, I am not that relentless inner critic. I'm the one who hears that critical voice.
That's a big shift.
It is. It creates crucial psychological distance. And that distance allows you to respond more intentionally instead of just getting swept away by the automatic reaction.
Yeah.
So mapping out your inner cast, starting to understand their scripts, their schemas, that's really the first foundational step towards being able to rewrite those scripts and choose more consciously which parts get to lead your actions.
You also made a point earlier that the goal isn't to get rid of these inner parts. Why is that such an important distinction to keep making?
Because, like we said, these parts didn't just appear out of nowhere. They developed for a reason, right? They were adaptations, they were survival strategies that helped you navigate challenges in the past. Maybe they helped you succeed in some way or feel like you belonged.
Okay.
The thing is, these parts might still be running the show, operating on those old rules, long after their original purpose isn't really relevant or helpful in your current life, your current circumstances.
They're stuck on an old setting.
Kinda, yeah. They haven't updated their software, so to speak.
Got it. So how do we start to bring a bit more calm, maybe? A bit more order to this inner chaos? You mentioned CBT, ACT, and mindfulness. How do they actually help with our inner Springfield?
Right. So these different approaches offer really practical tools for managing the dynamics within your inner Springfield. Think of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, as being like your inner script editor.
Okay, script editor. I like that.
It helps you become really aware of the unhelpful thought patterns, the
Yeah.
actual lines your characters are saying that are fueling negative feelings and maybe driving actions that aren't serving you well.
Yeah.
Then CBT gives you techniques to actually identify, question, challenge, and ultimately reframe those thoughts. So for instance, if your inner enforcer is going off about a tiny mistake you made, CBT might teach you to ask things like, okay, what's the actual evidence for this really harsh judgment? Or is there another way to look at this, a more balanced perspective? It helps soften those rigid pronouncements.
Okay, that makes sense. So CBT helps us look at the lines, the thoughts. What about ACT? You said that's like the stage director.
Yeah, acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, is a bit different. It's less about changing the thoughts directly and more like being the inner stage director.
Yeah.
It focuses on guiding your inner cast towards a more meaningful performance, a life aligned with your values.
How does it do that?
A key part is helping you to unhook or diffuse from those unhelpful thoughts. That's called cognitive diffusion.
Yeah.
So if your inner impulsive gratifier is yelling, eat the whole cake, you deserve it.
That calls, yes.
Diffusion techniques in ACT help you just notice that thought without automatically buying into it or obeying it. You might learn to say to yourself, I'm noticing I'm having the thought that I should eat the whole cake.
Creates distance again.
Exactly. It creates that space so you can then choose an action that's maybe more in line with your health values, for example. ACT also really emphasizes clarifying what's truly important to you, your core values, and then taking committed action towards those values, even when difficult thoughts and feelings show up.
So it's about choosing your actions even when the inner noise is loud.
Precisely. Choosing what matters, even with the discomfort.
And mindfulness, where does that fit in?
Mindfulness really helps you cultivate that ability to be the observer in the audience of your inner show.
Okay.
It's about learning to pay attention deliberately, right here, right now, without judgment, to whatever is happening internally, the thoughts, the feelings, the urges that just kind of arise and pass.
So you just watch the show.
You learn to watch it, yeah. By practicing mindfulness, you can learn to just notice these inner experiences without getting totally swept away by them, without automatically reacting to every single scene that plays out on your inner stage.
And you give an example.
Sure. So if your inner over-responsible part is churning out anxious thoughts about your massive to-do list,
Yep, familiar.
mindfulness can help you just observe those thoughts. There's the not enough time thought again, and maybe notice the tightness in your chest that goes with it without immediately jumping into that frantic, overwhelmed state. You just notice it's there.
So none of these are about silencing the cast or kicking them out.
Exactly right. It's much more about learning to listen more wisely to what they're trying to communicate, maybe directing them a bit more gently towards what actually matters to you and responding more intentionally instead of just being yanked around by their automatic, often dramatic reactions.
Okay. You also mentioned earlier these things called Springfield meltdowns. What do those look like in this inner world context?
Yeah, think of those as the really emotionally intense moments. Times when it feels like your inner cast has just gone completely rogue, maybe staged a riot. Yeah.
Okay.
And your inner life just feels like it's collapsing or in total disarray. It's when those familiar roles and scripts just go into overdrive, running completely on that ingrained autopilot without any conscious you steering the ship.
But it's not a sign you're broken.
No, absolutely not. It's really important to emphasize that these aren't signs of being fundamentally flawed. They're more like indicators that these old, deeply ingrained patterns have been strongly activated, usually by some kind of trigger.
So it's not a personal failing when that happens.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
These meltdowns often kick off when something in your present life, an emotional trigger, pokes at those old wounds and activates those old scripts and schemas we talked about.
Do you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you have an underlying schema related to unlovability. A small comment from a friend, maybe even meant harmlessly, could be perceived as a slight and trigger a really intense emotional reaction fueled by that old painful story of not being good enough. Or think about the people pleaser character in meltdown mode. They might go into frantic overdrive, trying to fix everything, trying to appease everyone, running themselves ragged,
And ending up
totally exhausted, maybe resentful, burnt out. Or consider the avoider character. When they're overwhelmed, their go-to meltdown script might be to just withdraw completely, isolate themselves. That might bring temporary relief from the stress, but ultimately it just makes feelings of loneliness worse.
Okay.
The key thing to remember is that these responses were learned. They were ways you figured out how to survive or cope in past situations. Understanding where they came from, their origins, gives you the power to start choosing different responses now. The past explains things, for sure, but it doesn't have to dictate your future actions.
That's hopeful. So what are some really concrete first steps someone listening could take? How do we start to break these cycles?
Well, the absolute foundation is really about cultivating awareness, just starting to notice. Approaching yourself with a bit of curiosity rather than judgment is huge, and having a willingness to just try some new perspectives or techniques.
So start by noticing. What specifically?
Start by noticing your triggers. What are the situations, the people, the comments in your current life that tend to poke at those old emotional sore spots and set your inner characters off on their usual routines?
Okay, notice triggers, then what?
Then pay attention to the automatic thoughts that pop up in those moments. What's the immediate story your mind tells you? And try to get curious about the underlying core beliefs that might be driving those thoughts. What deeper assumptions about yourself or the world are getting activated? And maybe even see if you can spot the broader schemas at play.
Right, connecting the dots.
Exactly. Remember, those Springfield meltdowns usually happen when the inner cast just goes on autopilot, reacting based on these unconscious scripts. So breaking that cycle really starts with creating even just a tiny bit of space, a pause, enough time to simply notice what's happening inside without immediately judging it or reacting to it.
And reminding yourself.
Reminding yourself, like we've said, you are not fundamentally broken. You're just caught up in roles and patterns that at one point probably made a lot of sense and served a real purpose.
This all sounds like it could be incredibly useful.
Mm-hmm.
What can really understanding our inner Springfield do for us? And maybe, what are the limitations? What can it do?
Yeah, that's a good question. Understanding your inner world in this way can definitely equip you with practical tools and strategies. It helps you navigate your emotions with more awareness, more intention. It gives you a kind of flexible framework for building self-awareness, definitely emotional resilience, and fostering more self-kindness, self-compassion. And ultimately, all of that can really support you in living a life that feels more aligned with what truly matters to you, your core values, and hopefully brings more fulfillment.
But it's not a magic wand.
Exactly. It's really important to be realistic. This is not a quick fix. It won't suddenly eliminate all stress or difficult emotions or challenges in life. That's just not possible or even desirable, really.
Right. Emotions are part of being human.
Totally. It's an ongoing process, this self-discovery and growth. It's a journey, not really a destination you arrive at. And another important point. While these ideas and tools can be incredibly valuable, they are not a replacement for professional mental health support if you're dealing with really severe or persistent mental health issues like deep depression, significant trauma, or intense anxiety disorders.
Good point. Professional health is key then.
Absolutely. And also remember, there's no single right way to do this. Your inner world is unique. Your journey of understanding it will be unique too. It takes patience and definitely kindness towards yourself along the way.
Okay. So, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway, the key message you'd want someone listening to hold on to from our conversation today?
I think the most important thing, really, is just to begin recognizing the different characters that show up inside you, noticing the typical scripts they tend to follow, just cultivating that awareness. That is the absolutely crucial first step. That's what opens the door to making meaningful changes in how you relate to yourself and your experiences.
And remembering you're not alone in it.
Oh, definitely. Remember, you are absolutely not alone in experiencing inner chaos or difficult emotions. It's a fundamental part of being human. Everyone has their own version of an inner Springfield.
So what's maybe one small actionable thing our listener could try this week? Just a little step.
Okay, how about this? Just take a few moments sometime this week to reflect. Think about which of those inner characters we talked about, the over-responsible, the impulsive gratifier, the self-deprecating avoider, the enforcer. Which one feels most familiar right now in your own inner world?
Just notice which one resonates.
Yeah, and maybe, just maybe, consider offering one small act of curiosity, or perhaps even a little bit of self-compassion towards that inner character when you notice it showing up. Instead of fighting it or judging it, just get curious. Ah, there you are again.
A little acknowledgement.
Exactly, that small shift. That's the very beginning of you stepping into the role of being the conscious director of your own